Everybody, and welcome back to the Matthew Schreiner podcast. And so I kind of started off this channel with the purpose of defending the faith, kind of like what Trent Horn does. And the reason I did this was because I love the faith. I love the faith. And I wanted to defend it, no matter where I am called to in life. My faith is important to me. And so, I mean, I could talk all day about the faith, but I did a while back the review on the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible. It's a little dark in here. I gotta get better lighting for here. But anyways, and I talked about how very much impressed I was with this book. Now we were with this Bible, and I was talking this weekend with after mass. I was talking with the deacon and with the celebrant of the mass, and we were talking about different scriptures and all that. And I said I was really impressed with this edition, with Dr. Scott Hahn's edition of this, because Dr. Scott Hahn is a wonderful defender of our faith. He's a wonderful and wise man. But it might, I certainly have been learning about this, or not really learning, but Dr. Scott Hahn is a convert. And I recently was just doing some reading on that, and I looked up his biography this morning on his website. And he was a Protestant pastor, and his wife and him both converted to the church. And Dr. Scott Hahn now has served as a professor. He served as an adjunct professor even up here up in the University of St. Mary of the Lake at Mundelein Seminary. He served for a year up there as an adjunct professor. Um, and then and he's done a lot more. He currently works and resides in as a professor at an adjunct professor at the Franciscan University of Steubenville. And one of his colleagues who he works very closely with is Dr. John Bergsma. And Dr. Bergsma is also a Protestant convert, and he was also a Protestant preacher. And he converted with his wife, and I was reading his biography, he's got 8 kids. If I counted correctly, he has 8 kids, which you can't get more Catholic than that, or more stereotypically Catholic. I said that in the last video about families. I said how, there's this stereotype about Catholics having big families. And Dr. Scott Hahn has 2 sons who are seminarians in whatever diocese in Steubenville Diocese. That's correct. But anyways, I said how really impressed I was with the Ignatius Study Bible, and I said, I'm not surprised with the great quality that's in this Bible, because Dr. Scott Hahn is such a wonderful defender of our faith, a wonderful and wise man. And other wise defenders, Dr. Bergsma and not Scott Hahn, Dr. Scott Hahn was who we were talking about, but Trent Horn, who is a Protestant convert to the faith. He was not a preacher, but he is a great defender of the faith. And then there's Matt Fradd, who I don't believe is a convert, but those were the 4 I was looking at and thinking about, because they're some of the greatest ones I can think of just off the top of my head. But there are other converts, such as Dr. Taylor Marshall, who too was a Protestant pastor. There's a verse from, or a quote from Bishop Henry Cardinal Newman, John Henry Cardinal Newman, who was an Anglican convert to the faith. He was an Anglican minister who eventually became a Catholic cardinal. And his quote is, "To be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant." Now, Trent Horn prefers his version of this, which is, "To be deep in history is to cease to be evangelical," or whatever else there might be. And I've talked with people who had gripes with evangelicals, which I won't talk about evangelicals as much, but what I do want to say is that we have such great defenders of our faith, and some of them are Protestant, and all of them are not priests. Now, they were ministers in their respective Protestant churches, but all of them, above all, they are all married men. All 4 of them are married men, and I point that out because we don't need to have, as I talked with St. Joseph last week about the holiness of families, I said how we don't need necessarily, we do need priests, but we don't necessarily need them to be the only defense of our faith. We do need priests because we need people to lead us and to grow the church, to rule the church, to run the church. But above all, the laity are upon the building block of the church. And when we look at people like Dr. Scott Hahn, who has 2 sons in the priesthood, the holiness of family says the holiness is bringing up good and holy children into the faith, and then allowing these children to grow into the vocation God has assigned for them in the same way that their parents were willing to choose that vocation of God is calling me to bring forth a good and holy family. Again, last week's topic. So defending the faith is a very important job. And above all, it's not just being able to defend that faith, it's also being able to live out that faith. Because you can be great, you can memorize all this theology knowledge, but not living out that faith, not living it out and knowing what it actually means, it's worthless to know everything about theology and not live out the faith that you claim to know so much about. So that's one part of it. And so when we have people like Dr. Scott Hahn, who on his biography, he's 2 sons who are in seminary formation, what better joy is there as a Catholic besides being the priest? I think it's an even greater joy to have a son or 2 to be a priest than to actually be that priest. I think it's a greater joy because above all, the greatest joy we can have is that greatness God calls us to, that first vocation of loving and knowing him. So above all, defending the faith begins living out that faith, because a lot of our Protestant converts, like these men, searched out the faith on their own. They had to learn on their own. And so they learned so much that we as cradle Catholics take for granted, that we just like instinctively know and don't really think about. But for these men, these men, and for these women in RCIA, or what's now OCIA, they changed the naming of it. We had over the weekend, that's tomorrow's blog post, by the way. This was not planned out for me to mention it here, but I was talking about the right of candidacy in tomorrow's blog post, and what the right of candidacy is, because we had the right of candidacy is, it's these men and women who are learning about the faith, who decided, yeah, Christ's faith, the Church of Christ is really calling me. Like, I feel this great calling to it. And then they say, I want to learn about it. They learn about it, and eventually they say, yes, I want to be a part of it. And so the right of candidacy is when they put their names in the book and they say, I will be at the Easter Vigil, which, if you're watching on the video, the background is my FSSP calendar, and that's the Easter Vigil. That's the Paschal candle, which this is the March calendar, but that's the Easter Vigil. So, because the month before was Candlemas. Candlemas fell on a Sunday this year, actually, which was really nice. But regardless, above all, what we need is defenders of the faith. And what that began as for a lot of our greatest defenders, like Trent Horn or Dr. Scott Hahn or Dr. John Bergsma or Dr. Taylor Marshall, what it began as was this call to Christ Church to enter into full communion with it. Because they were all Christians, but they had this almost calling on their heart. Almost like St. Augustine, because St. Augustine was not Christian like these other men. He was not a preacher like these other men. But Augustine felt this great call to the church, and he felt this way of conversion. So above all, the faith is not just priests and bishops, because while priests and bishops are important, the laity is important. The lay defenders of the faith are important, and we need great defenders. We need people who are willing to not only learn about the faith and live out that faith, but to share it, to evangelize, and to go forth as Christ asks. Because above all, even the greatest of lay people, because I know a lot of great lay people. Above all, there are other lay people who, as a lot of older men will, when they stop having kids or whatever, I know a couple who become deacons. And so those deacons are a part of clergy, but they are married men. And their wives are very important in their lives as deacons, because it is a wife who is present at the ordination as he's there. For the most part, he is there with his wife, and his wife is just as important in this process as the man himself. The point being, lay defenders of the faith are very important. Defending the faith is a very important job. And being able to teach it as a theology teacher or as an RE teacher is an important job. And I know I've talked about men because a lot of our defenders of the faith are. But that's not how it has to be. We had a wonderful, wonderful female defender of the faith. And granted, she was a nun, but still, Sister or Mother Angelica, who started EWTN. Look what EWTN has become. Look at how great her defense of the faith was. And it can be a laywoman. For a while, Laura Horn, Trent Horn's wife, although I believe she's a cradle Catholic, had her own channel. But still, we need great defenders of the faith, male or female. And we need great defenders of the faith who are willing to start it in the domestic church, in their own home, to share it in their own home, but also to share it in their own lives, to share it with students in a school as a theology teacher, in our Catholic schools as theology teachers, in our Catholic elementary schools as religion teachers, in our Catholic religious education as our RE teachers. We need great defenders of the faith, beginning from home, from the parents, to the people online, because how our future is going to be, how the future of our faith is going to be, is quite literally on these devices. And that's the future. Our future is computers. And we've heard that since, since the beginning of computing. And I talk about that on the Atari Guy, my other YouTube channel, because I think that computers are very important. Bishop Robert Barron compares the communion of the saints to his computer, because he was talking about how when he has trouble with his computer, he had his friend from across the country remotely connect to it, and he thought this is a great way to look at the communion of the saints, or texting, calling, all those things. So above all, we can have great bishops, we can have great priests, we can have great popes, and we can have great defenders of the faith on that realm. But above all, our lay defenders of the faith, the people who daily live out that faith too, we need them as much as we need great priests, and we need great families, like I said in the last video, so I'm not going to reiterate too much. Right, that's it for this week. I do hope to release a video on Thursday. This last week got crazy at the end of the week, so I do hope to be able to sit down and start a video on Thursday. That's it for today. God bless you all. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.